Hey, good evening, everybody. Hey, thank y'all so much first of all, for being a part of this with Crowd Pleasers. We really do appreciate you for giving us the opportunity to serve you as a professional development provider. I'm Lakeisha McGowan, and I am just delighted to share with you today. In our first workshop, this one is called Pathway to Peace, Starting the Conversation. We realized that there have been so many things that have been going on in our country, and we are all trying to just figure out how to navigate these waters, especially as you guys begin to open the doors to go back to school for 2020. And so any information that you hear today, we hope that you will take this information and use it to kind of better your program and just make a bigger change in our society as a whole. Pathway to Peace will consist of two parts. Part one of this, I have two directors joining me on a panel that I will introduce to you in just a minute. They're both from very diverse programs. They have various experiences, and we're going to share with you conversations that we feel like will help you hopefully bridge that gap between your dancers, regardless of what their race or social ethnic background is. Part two of this workshop will be a video presentation provided to you by Ramona Clark, who is the lead counselor at Tompkins High School. She will provide you with tools, resources, and literature to help you open the conversations and hopefully, again, bridge that gap with your dancers. I'm going to introduce my panel that's here with me today. My first panelist is April Hunt, and April has been an educator at Morton Ranch High School since 2004. I know that April has a very successful program in Katy ISD and a very diverse program, so I have much respect and love for her, and I know that the information that you hear her provide you with today is going to be very helpful and useful. My second panelist is Elaine White, and Elaine was an educator at Seven Lakes High School in Katy ISD for several years, and currently she is the director at Manville High School in Alvin ISD. Elaine has had a variety of experiences, not just from being a dance educator, but also as a student. And I must say, Elaine is one that's very near and dear to me, as Elaine was one of my first students when I started teaching high school. And just a little bit about myself. I started off as a director at Hightower High School in Fort Bend ISD. I moved to Alief Taylor in Alief ISD for a year, and then I went on to Seven Lakes High School in Katy ISD for several years before moving into administration. After leaving administration, my full-time job here now is at Crowd Pleasers. But I still have a love and passion for making sure that we provide directors with resources, you guys that are on the front lines that can really make change and differences, provide you with that information that you need to help make that change. So I hope that, again, this workshop is going to be beneficial for you and that you will take this information and use it to really empower your students. We're going to start with our first question. Elaine and April, given the issues in our country surrounding racial and social injustices, how have you or will you respond to these current issues with your team and or just your dancers in your classrooms in general?
Just my response to my team will be to be that mediator and listen to what their feelings are and try to help them process what is going on in our country, because that's a big thing that us as educators are going to have to do. We're going to have to help our kids navigate through their feelings and all that they've been processing.
And I totally agree with that too. I feel like in our world, we have achieved a huge growth in the respect and love and support for fellow women. And I think we need to capitalize on that. I think we have worked very hard to find that equality space. We have single moms out there just rocking it, doing what they do for their families. And I think we are so blessed to be in charge of such a successful aesthetic sport, and it is predominantly women. And so I think sometimes we need to unite our students that we work with and continue to build each other up. We need to be shouting for each other, and we need to make sure that it's the most colorful group of young women that are on our campus representing our campus in a positive light. And I think that definitely has to come from the director. Being okay with uncomfortable conversations is definitely important in terms of getting feedback from our students, but really empowerment, reach out to the students, make sure that they know we are establishing relationships, like Elaine said, and pushing for their success from a positive standpoint.
Perfect. Thank you all both for that. My next question, as we prepare to go back to school, and I know that things are going to look so different, whether you are going in person or virtual, and who knows how long any of that is going to happen. The bottom line is that you're still going to have some type of connection and communication with your students. And so as you prepare to do that, what are some ways that you can create a culture within your classroom and program that celebrates diversity?
For my particular campus, I'm very fortunate that we have a diverse campus that is very accepting of each other. In the hallways and in the common areas, you will notice that it is not an exclusion environment. We are very much inclusive. There are a lot of brave students out there that are just being welcoming in the hallways. And I think it's important that my leadership team as a director reflects my team in that nature. So, it's important that the people that do have roles and responsibilities above an average team member are just as diverse, vocal, and an advocate, I would say, for their peers and for their friend groups, because I think inclusion is huge. And sometimes we see it in bigs versus littles. Sometimes we see it in a leadership team versus just a team member. So I think it's really important as a director that I'm very accepting of all ideas, and that my leadership team definitely reflects my team dynamic.
Yeah. The only thing I would add to that is just embrace your team members learning about their cultures that are represented on the team, and include that into your socials, or just even the whatever you do performance wise. When you talk about music, when you talk about costume choices, you just have to really be open to, I have a diverse organization that I'm leading, and so I have to embrace that as in many ways as possible. And I think you have to start by just learning about what you have as far as your teammates when it comes to the diversity.
Super. Those are very good points, y'all. Thank y'all for that. My next question deals more along the lines of when things come up, when issues arise. So when you witness an issue within your program that you feel like might be racially driven, and we know that it happens, y'all. It happens often. And sometimes the kids hide it from us and we never know, or we never hear about it until things have gone too far. And so how do you handle when issues come up? How do you tackle those head on to make it so that it's a culture of, this is not what we tolerate here, because we celebrate each other? So how do y'all handle that?
For me, I try my best to remain neutral in all instances, obviously. And I think it's important as a director, when you are faced with a small, medium, or large issue, that we are encouraging our students just to pause and listen to understand where the other person is coming from. We have a very bad habit, and we are probably just as guilty as directors, because we are very type A. We want to listen to respond or to solve, and that is not going to happen, especially with a teen peer group. So I think you're going to probably have to mediate a lot of the conversations, especially if it's in the medium and large category. But when it is brought to your attention, or if it is an issue that is going to affect any member of your team, I think you have to encourage the conversation, mediate when needed, but let the students really vocalize feelings, thoughts, and reflect without having to be talked over or expect a response immediately. So listening, I think, is huge for me.
And to add to that, teaching them how to communicate those feelings. I think that's an important role for us as directors when we have the small, medium, and large. I like that example, April.
Yes.
No matter what the circumstance is, we have to teach our young ladies how to communicate with each other, because we know as directors, sometimes they don't know how to express themselves and have a healthy dialogue with one another, especially when it comes to those racial issues, because we got to go back to learning about the diversity, learning about our fellow teammate, and then how do we communicate when you hurt my feelings, or that hurt something that's near and dear to my culture, or whatever the case may be. Teaching our students how to communicate with one another, set those boundaries. I think that's huge, really making sure that they understand the communication piece.
And I think that that's very important that, as y'all both mentioned, as directors, that you assess the situation, that you assess, is it a small problem? Is it a medium problem? Or is this a big problem? And then I think it's also important that, Elaine, you hit a good point, that we teach them how to pause and then how to communicate, because not everything, you don't have to have a response. You're supposed to listen at times. And so I think that the more that we teach our young children that, or young teenagers, the better off, hopefully, it's going to be in the long run. It takes small change, and it's change at a time, and so if we can make one step at a time, with one student at a time, to help make hopefully big change in the future. And so I do thank y'all, because that's very, very good points. My next question: how do you combat what's being taught at home that creeps into your programs while still being respectful of the boundaries that people have at home? Because we clearly know that everybody is from a different walk of life, and we don't know what parents are teaching at home. We know what we want we know that we want societal changes. Okay, and we know that as educators, you're with these students more than their parents are. And so you can evoke change for sure. But how do you do that and still keep the boundaries with whatever they're being taught at home?
One of the things that I like to make sure I am to show my respect is we go back to that listening. Okay, tell me what's going on. Tell me how it's being received at home, and help them process, okay, this is what I'm hearing at home, but this is what I'm seeing. Because we have to recognize kids sometimes can get confused. They're hearing one thing and they might believe something totally different because of their own experiences. So just listening, and again, helping them process that. And I think that helps you stay respectful, because you never should go against what home is saying, but acknowledge what home is saying, and then listen to what they're saying. And again, it goes back to that mediation and just finding that place, that balance for them, because they are teenagers and we know their hormones and their thoughts are just kind of everywhere. But I think us as directors, we're there to help bring that balance and just say, okay, let's pause. Okay, here's one thing, there's another thing. Okay, now where is the right way to go with this? So that's what I would give up.
I love the pause. It's so important.
It is so important. The pause is so important.
And to add on to that, I think that we do often talk on our campus and within our program about professionalism. So yes. We want our students, just by being in fine arts in general, we want their language and their actions and their body language to be of a professional state. And we have complained a lot about social media and how that's really made our lives difficult as directors. So this is our avenue to say, well, what is your private self versus your public self? So I think you are now, as a director, in charge of character building, and that might mean having a professional conversation that would be much different from a private conversation. So I think the students need to know and decipher between the two. And we talk a lot about being employable on our campus, that relating everything to a job instance, and there will be a conversation that they cannot have with a colleague, a coworker, or maybe even a customer that they could feel very comfortable having with a boss or a district manager or something like that. So, but yes, adding on to that, I definitely think that professionalism is a way to have them. We're not losing their ideas. We're not saying that they're not valid, but what is appropriate for the classroom or for the locker room, it might change.
Okay, so this next question, y'all, I know it's a tough question. I went from a very diverse school at Hightower, and then I went over to Seven Lakes High School in Katy, where no one looked like me. And it was challenging, but it was awesome, and I got through it, and I was celebrated, and I loved every single bit of the children and the community and those families. But I do understand that that's not everybody's experiences. And so I want you to tell me, when you have to address an issue or a concern with a team member who may not look like you and may be of a different race, or they have different cultural beliefs, they have different religious beliefs, all these are real things that y'all have to deal with. How do you proceed?
If it's a situation where I don't know how I'm going to address it, I really do seek the advice of other directors, and I really like to gather information from a wide range. So typically I work in threes. I'll ask someone who's young, someone who's just in the business. They might have a different, fresh idea perspective that I never would have thought about. And then I go to my more seasoned directors that have experienced some things just to get some insight. And then someone that's middle of the road, kind of in the same place that I'm in. And I think the more you collaborate, the more information you get, the more you can make a very sound decision on how to approach it. Never approach any situation head on, because your emotions will get involved in that. And so if you really take a step back and gather good information, you can make a better response. It's never going to be perfect, but I think you can make a better response. So that's kind of how I go about it. And especially if it's someone that doesn't look like me and I need to address someone that doesn't look like me, I look for a director that looks like that student so that I can get that cultural information or that ethnic background information that will be valuable to how I respond.
And I think too, adding to what you said, Elaine, I think that any director that is willing to collaborate with a fellow director in their district or a neighboring director or organization, that just makes you stronger. We have so many creative colleagues. We're lucky to have that, and working together is something I don't think all subjects do like we do. So I think that is really good advice. I would say if it was my team and there was a problem or concern, I would approach it from a motherly perspective. Not everyone has a teenage daughter at home. I realize that. Lucky me. But I think that it takes, or a family member for that matter, if there is something that needs to be addressed, you want to come from the same conversation and intention of a tenderness, being sensitive, empathy, sympathy. You want to come from a agree to disagree sometimes place. And when you're approaching something that you may have to go solve yourself, or someone comes to you to have it solved, the student, if she is your student, she is your child like she would be at home, you're going to approach it from the best wholehearted standpoint, I guess. And then, specifically though, we have our biggest debate, I think, it has been contest season and how to have a costume that's the most flattering. Well, if I have a student that doesn't look like them, or maybe she's a little bit heavier set or very slender in frame and she's insecure about that, I would search to my leadership team. I would have my leadership team help me a little bit with that, making those types of decisions. Maybe hairstyle, that's probably the biggest issue is hairstyle, because we want everyone to feel comfortable to move. And if you have really long hair that's all the way to your legs, a bun isn't going to work because it's impossible to do that. So I definitely seek out my leadership team. I let them help me make decisions. And that seems so minimal, but I want to make sure all of my members feel comfortable. So every single member, it needs to have a voice in the matter or the problem, if possible. And I definitely think our leadership team on my particular campus has been very helpful with that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's great, April and Elaine. I do think that it is important that when you are running into issues that you have to address, and you do start to feel uncomfortable with how might I respond, I do think it's a good idea to bounce your response off of several people before you make that response, because then you make an informed decision. And so I think that is important when you dialogue with colleagues about various situations and come up with solutions. So then you guys can kind of play the devil's advocate with one another and the what ifs with one another. And I do think it is very important to remove emotion out of it prior to making those decisions, because we often make decisions that are emotionally driven, and that benefits no one because it's always going to come back. And I think that when I was a school administrator, I would always, whether my assistant principal job or my finance director job, I would always tell my educators, listen, take a deep breath first before you call that parent or before you talk to this student. And then let's think through every possible solution that you could come up with to solve this issue. Because you want to be able to say, I've thought through this, and this is what I'm hearing is the problem. And here's what I think is the solution. How can we get through this together? So I feel like it's more of a give or take. And I do think that back in the day, our old school dance drill team mentality was it's my way or the highway. And I do think that those days of it's my way or the highway are gone. And that we do have to find a way to make sure that everybody feels the inclusion and that all the decisions that we make are, yes, they're uniform decisions, but we also have to know that sometimes I'm going to have to make a specialized decision based on this given situation. So I do think that those are very important points.
I think, Lakeisha, you taught me type that initial email and then erase it and then start it all over again.
That's right.
To get that emotion out. Yeah.
Type that email and you know what? Send it to a friend. And go, I just needed to send that to you because this is how I was going to respond. Now I'm going to really respond. So I do think that that's really important. That's a very good point to just get it out, whether you call someone on the phone and say, I'm going to say all of these things because this is what I'm thinking. But I know that I can't really say this when I pick up the phone to call this parent. So now I'm going
and that's funny because that's why you should confide in a colleague, because you tell your spouse or your bestie and she's like, oh, no, you were totally right, and or my husband, just quit. People do it every day. We don't want that. Right, we need to decompress a little bit. Yeah, you're right.
And so yes, decompress, y'all. Take a step back, think about the problem, write it down, type it out, talk it out, and then respond. Okay, very important points. Okay, my next question is, how do you support and promote dialogue amongst your team when issues arise? And I know that this is hard, y'all. They are going through so many different things, especially this generation, whether it's racial issues, whether it's the social media and the bullying, like it's a lot, body image issues. And so they're constantly going through something. And so when all these issues start coming up, how do you deal with those things? How do you dialogue?
That's a good question. I think initial director and student conversation should happen. I think that it might be a short conversation. It might be more direct. But I think that you need to know what has happened and where everything is starting from, and then mediate a difficult conversation, but let them speak. It might be a small group or it might be a large group, but give them the tools, like Elaine mentioned, empower them to actually listen to understand, not to respond, and let them work through some of the thoughts, because chances are it probably started with a text message, which has no emotion whatsoever besides those terrible emojis, right? So
yes.
But follow up, I think. So initiate, you got to speak to the student. You're going to need to hear two sides. There's always three sides to every story. Them and the director. I'm just kidding. But mediate the conversation, and whether that's a big or a small group, but then follow up, because I think sometimes they'll call it quits just to leave the space, or they have to be at work, or they need to, go to tutorials, and you want a true resolve. So I think your job is to really support them, find out where they're coming from, but let them talk it out. But then follow up and make sure that closure. And usually it boils down to just two people, friend groups, or, I don't know, big sister situations, returning members, leadership groups. But usually it boils down to two. So have them let you know that there was something that was solved, or they agreed to disagree, and that the problem will no longer be an issue between them.
Yeah, I agree with what April said. I mean, the only thing I would add to that is I call them come to Jesus meetings. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that on this, but that's definitely something we do. And we have those regular all the time when we need to have hey, we need to come together and figure this out. And then from there, it might come into those small groups, but just the dialogue. I think, again, and Lakeisha, you said it, long gone are the days where the director's here and the kids are here. No, we're all in this together. And so those dialogues have to happen amongst the group, small groups, individuals, two people. I mean, you get very creative with how you help them process through that.
And sometimes, and reflecting on past experience, there have been times where I knew I needed to be in the room and I needed to be right there next to them with eye contact. But then there were other times where I would just type on my computer or file away files, and I'm a busybody, but I'm listening to everything. Because if it's something very sensitive, or if it's something that, could cause that very high level of emotion, I would step right in, right, to mediate again, to bring him back down to a good state of emotion. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Those are both all very good points. My next question for you is, I know this is a challenge, y'all, but gone are the days that we put everybody in suntan tights and call it a day. It just, we have to be more mindful than that. And so how do you offer and how do you search and plan for the makeup and for the tights, the jazz shoes, and the other accessories for your various ethnic groups, skin tones? How do you do that? What do you do?
So definitely I'll take this one because, again, very diverse team. I have everybody. I call it my nations. So I'm looking for tights that address everybody's ethnic background. And so I said this earlier, long gone are the days that we are staying in our comfortable space. And so as directors, we sometimes might have to put in the work on the front end to combat that, right? So we might have to go find new vendors. We might have to go find new companies to bring to our vendors and say, hey, they sell a more variety of tights or jazz shoes or the foot undies, the bras. There's a lot of things to consider. You might have to look at new products. And so I know that requires a lot of work on our end, but it helps build that culture that you want. You want your kids to feel accepted to your program. And so in order for that to happen, you might have to do some different work than what you had experienced even when you were in high school. I was blessed to have Lakeisha, so we didn't really have that challenge. But I know that's not everybody's story. And so you might have had a different experience and you might have to shy away from that to make your students feel included. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, when you change those tights to reflect the whole student, you will see an amazing difference, not even just from the kid, but from the parents and the community. Like, oh, wow. It becomes a visual representation of the diversity on your team.
And what a good place, our vendors right now. We have very loyal vendors, and I think sometimes we're afraid to reach out or to do something new because we have such a good working relationship, and it's so much easier just to send that email, text message, pick up the phone, call the same person. But I do agree with Elaine. There's a lot out there now. And, this is a great time because the vendors would love to continue to establish business with you. I think, Bolera has a good brand.
Yes, and Blends, I believe, is another one as well.
And they have much more footwear than they did before. I remember we used to stain tights and we used to stain shoes, but now there's a lot more. And I think sometimes we get caught up on tights, but the shoes don't match. And that cuts the line. For me as a director, I want the whole look. I want to look on the football field and I still see that student. And it's just polished, it's almost like it just completes the look to me. Makeup is something I think directors need to consider because we will get a pre-packaged, container that has blush and eyeshadow and things like that. But when you get under those lights or if you're on the stage, it is not complimentary. And that would also contribute to what Elaine said. Your students will feel like $1 million if they look like $1 million. And if they will take much more pride into having a custom look as opposed to maybe something that was passed down year after year after year.
Can I add to that too? I know some directors might be concerned, well, that might cost more. I can probably put a paycheck on that parents would do whatever it takes to get their student the look that they need that makes them feel comfortable. So don't shortchange that piece. Well, yeah, that's a little bit more not as cost efficient, and I get that piece. But if you can go to a parent and say, I know it's a little bit more, we can do an extra fundraiser, but this is matching your student's skin tone, I can guarantee you parents will be on board with that. So don't be afraid to have that conversation, that dialogue. And I've done that. I have like 3 or 4 that have one skin tone, and I'll talk to those parents like, hey, I need you to get this. This is going to be the best. And they're like, oh, great, Ms. White, let's get it done. So if you have to have those pocket of conversations, don't be afraid of that. Like, that's what diversity makes us do. It makes us kind of bring everybody into the fold. And so don't be fearful of what kind of reception. I think you'll get a more warming reception than you're thinking.
I totally agree. And delegate. So if you're worried about the time it takes to match the shades for makeup, for example, that takes a while. Most any vendor that's going to work with you is going to be willing to sit down. They could even talk about application and then do a tone match at the same time. I mean, Sephora, come on, these kids go to Ulta and Sephora all the time. So making it kind of like a personal thing where they come in, it doesn't have to be on your time either. You could direct them and they're going to be there anyway. So they can go do shade matches and stuff like that.
Those are very, very, very good points, y'all. And I hope that this particular topic and information that our educators are hearing from you, I hope that everybody starts to make this particular transition, because I do believe if they look good, they feel good, they perform good. And that gives them more confidence. And we're in the business of boosting confidence, And so I do hope that people will heed this particular information in particular from both of y'all. So thank y'all. That was like very good information. My last question for you is, how do you develop the confidence and culture within your team that promotes risk-taking amongst all of your dancers? And I'm referring more to making sure that, I know that April, you alluded to that you try to make sure that your leadership team is representative of your diverse school environment. And so, but I know we all know, we see other teams and we have other director friends that may not necessarily be the case. And sometimes you will hear from a student, well, I don't feel comfortable, or I'm not as good as they are. So how do you boost that confidence in kids to give them that push that they need to take a risk?
For us, that's a huge task because of experience as dancers. We don't gather a lot of students in our space that are experienced, and so taking a risk and I guess pushing them or raising their level of confidence is definitely a huge task. I think it does boil down to having a safe space. If you feel safe in your environment, and that is in many different areas, then you're more likely going to take a risk. We're very heavy on our program with praise. I very rarely will anyone do a small group or a large group performance without hearing lots of shouts and yells. So much so that when that doesn't happen, we all wonder if everyone's okay. They are very encouraging of one another. They do shout outs daily. We started doing reward systems on the board, and that was at first we did it with our leadership team keeping track, but then we found it's much more efficient if you give the dance team members the stickers or the markers or whatever too, and then when they master a skill, or if they try something that they've never done before, or if they remember the dance from beginning to end, they get to put their name on the wall, and they have an incentive out there that's published. I think when everyone has created a safe space to take a risk, you will see the confidence improve. And we see it, I think, as directors anyway, from students beginning to end. We know that their head's higher, their posture is taller because of their experience on the team. But you definitely want to empower them to try, never be complacent, always go out there. I guess, that's all I can think of really for me.
I credit this to you too, Lakeisha, just as my mentor. Building those relationships is so critical for the students to feel safe. basically what April was saying. They definitely have to feel safe, but how do you make them feel safe? You got to build a relationship. You have to take the time out, even if it's just 5 minutes and it's the quiet girl in the back. You have to pull her in and kind of figure out, okay, how can Miss White, how can I kind of get in tune with her? Like if every girl feels that way, you build that confidence to help them take those risks. So building those relationships, and I know we hear that a lot, but that is critical. We can't stay in the office. We can't stay in our corner. We can't sit in our chair. This generation needs that. They definitely need a different level of relationship building than we've ever experienced, whether we were on dance team or we have been a director for a while. This generation needs that because we don't know what they're getting at home.
And media, I think they compare themselves so much to media.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So their confidence is not there yet. They are still filtering everything they do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, definitely stepping outside of your box. I also encouraging your teammates to build relationships with each other. And I think if they get that confidence from others on the team, they also will be willing to take risks. So one of the things, so we're in virtual live camp right now. And one of the things that I told the returners, I said, send a message to someone that you don't know, even if it is a returner. Send something, build something with someone that you don't know, and just even saying that whether they do it or not, at least I'm putting it out there. We gotta establish that as a team in order for us to grow closer together and help each other through whatever we're experiencing. But definitely, if you want them to take a risk, they have to be safe and build that relationship with them.
Very good. Thank y'all both so much for that information. I do hope that the information that has been shared from two people's perspective that are in very diverse environments, that have director groups that they are a part of, and that they actively dialogue and communicate with other directors in their districts often and in other school districts. So I think they have a good gauge on how we can at least just start to make sure we are mindful in our field. We have to stay in our lane. And that's what I often tell people. You can only evoke so much change, but do it in your lane. And when you're in your lane in dance education, we can start somewhere. And I think by us starting here at this step one, this is scratching the surface, but just by doing some of these things alone can start to create bigger change eventually. And so that is our hope by doing this particular workshop and allowing directors to hear this information, that hopefully if you are having or struggling with any of these issues, now you kind of have a little bit of insight of how to handle or what to do, or seek help from someone else that's in the industry should you need that help. And so I thank April and Elaine for giving of their time to be a part of this workshop with us here at Crowd Pleasers. And again, we're here for y'all. We're here as you navigate the waters in 2020. We know it's going to look different. We know there's a lot, whether it's the health and safety issues and our social and racial injustice issues. We know it's a lot for you guys to take on. So those of you that are on the front lines in education, hats off to you. Again, Crowd Pleasers, we appreciate you and everything that you guys do every single day. This will conclude part one of your workshop. Thank y'all so much.